What's going on, everybody? Kim Becker and Drew Kreisman here for your weekly Colorado Rockies AMA. It's about to be kind of a slow few weeks here, heading into the All-Star break in a bit here. But Drew, how have you been enjoying the Rockies season the last week?
A lot better, even though there have been some ugly moments. It's a weird thing to say because they lost like 25-1 in there. That was not a whole lot of fun. But as I said on my show on the longer podcast right after that game, right, as you and I have talked about from the very beginning of spring training, this isn't a season about wins and losses. I understand it's hard to buy into that. I understand that. But in the immortal words of Gimli from Lord of the Rings, it still only counts as one.
Still only counts as one, and they ended up winning the series, which is
won the series,
unbelievable.
And by the way, Kim, because I know you're a betting person.
I am.
In the future, anytime a team gets beat by 20 or more runs to under 5, bet the team that lost the next day.
Okay.
Every time a team gets crushed by that much in the game of baseball, because the sport seems to insist upon like proving itself, because you get crushed like that in the NFL or the NBA or presumably the NHL. I don't know as well. It's because the other team was much better than you, and that's why it happened. In baseball, it could have just been the starting pitcher had a nightmare day, right? It doesn't actually. And the Rockies are still a bad baseball team. Don't get me wrong, but that game didn't mean anything in the grand scheme of things. And the more important things are actually, as we've always talked about from the first day of spring training, a group of 7 to 10 young players who are almost across the board, all of them performing well. So that's why I'm having a lot more fun watching this team lately, even though they're still losing. At least they're giving me something to focus on and write and talk about.
100%. Yeah. Honestly, it was probably still kind of fun to witness that 25-1 game.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, it's just history. Again, if this was a season where I was hoping that the Rockies were going to compete, that would be incredibly frustrating. In this season, it's the difference between 68 losses and 67 losses. I don't care.
At the end of the day, who cares, right?
It was kind of funny. You have to be able to laugh at stuff like that.
You do. I just kept watching it on Google, just like the number tick up, tick up, tick up. And I was like, okay, where's the mercy rule here? Like, are we done yet?
13-0 in the third inning, the PlayStation would have mercy ruled you and you'd have to turn the system off. They're like, no, you can't do that.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have to live this one out. All right, well, we do have a few questions here that we'll get to that fans sent in. So thank you so much to everybody for doing that. Drew, the first question, has your stance changed at all as far as boycotts don't work? That being said, speaking about the Rockies, of course.
No, my stance on this hasn't changed. I don't believe that boycotts work at all. I haven't seen any evidence whatsoever. I mean, zero. If anything, my stance on this has been deepened by what's going on with I guess I'll still call them the Oakland A's for now, right? If anything, losses of ticket sales and finances are often used by owners to tighten the belt, to excuse not spending as much money on the team next year, and in a worst case scenario, maybe even ultimately moving the team to another place. Now, I don't think that's ever going to happen with the Rockies, so that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it's more likely that Dick Monfort moves the team than it is that he's convinced that he ought to sell it because people aren't showing up. There's a number of reasons why boycotts don't work. Specifically here, people are going to go to the games anyway. I don't think you can even organize one. It'd have to be like a 3-year-long thing that enough fans would commit. And Kim, you're better versed in the other sports than I am. Can you think of a time in any major sport where a fan base has boycotted by not going to the games and the owner has gone, oh, shoot, I better make a bunch of front office changes and we better be in the championship in 2 years?
No, especially in other sports, there is far more money in the front office than there is in ticket sales and whatnot going on that they don't care. That does not affect their decision making.
Right. TV sales, sponsorship deals,
merchandise.
All of that brings in a lot more money. Now, a team like the Rockies is a little more dependent upon their ticket sales. But again, I've studied this team and watched them my entire life. I know the history of it and what happens when attendance goes down, the budget for the next season goes down. That's all. That's how they make up for it. They don't, so if anything, boycotting your team is just hurting the roster for next year. I understand now. If you don't want to subject yourself to it, I'm not telling you you have to go to the Rockies, right? But I do try to remind people that they shouldn't be. I don't want to use that word. They shouldn't be down on people that do go to any of their sports teams, right? They're not the problem. And people do this with the Rockies sometimes because they do well in attendance. And I've seen this recently. People saying, well, there's no reason for the team to ever get better because people keep going and supporting this nonsense. But I just don't think that's the way it works at all.
I don't either. And to elaborate on that point, I mean, I think this is something that we've seen here in Denver the last few weeks. Denver, especially, and Colorado is a very big sports city and state. People will support their team. We saw it with the Nuggets. Everyone was saying, you know, Denver is not a basketball city. No one cares about the Nuggets, yada, yada. You saw how many people were at the parade. And right now, we don't have any other sports going on when it comes to professional sports in Colorado. I guess the Rapids and the Rockies. So people will go to the Rockies games. Like you said, Coors Field is a great place to be in the summer. When the weather is nice, Lodo is great to be. People will still go. So I agree with you. Like, I understand that people want changes in the front office. They want changes to this team. But even me, I'm still going to the games every once in a while. I'm like, yeah, who wants to go to a Rockies game? Because it's still something for a sports fan in Denver to be a part of.
Yeah. And by the way, in other cities where the facilities aren't as nice, where the experience isn't as good, again, Cincinnati isn't incentivized to get better. Their ballpark experience just sucks. When the team is bad, no one goes and it's not fun, and the team is bad.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting that some people have turned that into a negative about the Rockies. I do understand the logic of there's no incentive for them to get better, but that incentive that doesn't exist for any team is my point, right? When the Mariners hadn't made the postseason since 2001, and at no point during that time did their lack of attendance, which absolutely happened several times, make them go, oh shoot, we better try harder.
Yep.
You know?
Yep. Exactly. All right. A tough one there, but we'll move on here. After that big loss, so the 25-1 that we were talking about against the Angels, but winning the series, the Colorado Rockies did beat the Angels in the series. I wonder, is run differential a useful stat? 32-12, right? Was the difference?
Over the course of the
series?
3 games or something like that. It was awful. I had another number jump in my mind, but that was the 4-game set that they got crushed in Atlanta. So yes, run differential is a useful stat, but it is a correlation, not causation situation. It is often the case that a team that has a big run differential in the positive is one of the best teams in baseball. Right? Like, obviously, more often than not, the more runs you score, the more you prevent, the better you're going to do. It's oftentimes that simple. But in the game of baseball, that where your momentum is the next day's starting pitcher, and everything that happens from every single game to every single pitch is an isolated event. And because of that, yes, there are always teams that outperform their run differential or are built not to score a ton of runs, but to prevent a lot of runs. And you'll win ball games that way. Teams that win close ball games, that have good bullpens or clutch hitters. I do believe that those things are a thing. I do believe that, obviously, in these kinds of moments that you can see that, a 25-1 game is going to throw things like that off, because especially in the modern age of baseball, where guys will start, or by guys, I mean managers, will start like throwing position players, right? That never happened when I was a kid. You would never see, I don't care what the score was, you would not see a position player on the mound, but maybe once a year. Now we see it like once a week, and I got all kinds of interesting feelings on that too. But because of that, these run differentials are going to get a little bit weird. And it's still a matter of winning individual games, not scoring the most number of runs. So it can be a useful stat, but it's important to remember that it's a correlation thing, that it's not always a causation thing.
Makes sense. All right. It's MLB Trade Deadline Day. Ideally, who is playing for new teams here?
Ooh, let's live in the future. Let's live 1 month in the future from now. I like this. Okay, so they traded Moustakas. Excellent news, and that gives me the indication that it makes me sad in my heart because I love him. But it's excellent news.
Saw that one coming. Yeah.
He was a great guy to have around too, for a lot of clubhouse things and for a lot of these young players. But this is exactly the day they signed him. You and I talked about it, and I said, this is weird unless what they're doing is hoping to play him off the bench a little bit, not blocking any of the young guys, and if he performs, flip him for some pitching, which is exactly and precisely what happened. Now they need to do that 3 or 4 more times. Jurickson Profar, Randall Grichuk.
Okay.
Those guys for sure, I think, have some value, and not a ton. Again, like with the Moustakas trade, you're getting a double-A pitcher with some hope, right? But that's great that you need 5 more of those. Harold Castro, I believe, has some value. So those are the 3 guys I think almost need to be traded, really kind of should be traded. And I think CJ Cron ought to be traded. He's back. He was playing defense at first base last night, like someone who was showcasing himself. And I know he loves being a Rocky, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's the guy they can get a little something more for, especially if he can hit a couple of big home runs here in the next month and remind people out there he could be a major asset for a team in the hunt looking for a big bat down the stretch. And there are going to be some of those, whether they're going to DH him or put him at first base. And Cron is a 100,000% awesome clubhouse guy that any team would love to pick up. Yeah. So if he has a solid little month here, I would think the Rockies could actually get something decent for him. And I think that would be probably the best for everybody involved. I don't think they'll trade Blackmon or Bard.
Okay. All right. I like that one. A little hypothetical in the future, like you said. Yep. Fun. Okay. A couple more here before we wrap this guy up. At this point in the season, being 16 and a half games out and the 3rd worst team in baseball, not the worst though, 3rd worst, do the Rockies need to unload some of the bigger contracts and just bring up more from the minors to see what we have, in essence, almost a rebuild?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And honestly, folks, I think that's what the Rockies are doing. I think it's what they've been doing since the offseason. They hate that word. They don't want to admit it. And I understand why, philosophically speaking, they don't want to say, especially at this moment in baseball's history, anything close to "we're losing on purpose." Yeah. Because there are a lot of teams who are losing on purpose. And it's frustrating, and it's bad for the game, and it's making the game worse in a lot of different ways across the board. So the Rockies have been very careful to come out and say, we're trying to win. We're trying to compete right now. Mm-hmm. As weird as it sounds to people, look at 16 and a half games out. You're not doing a good job, right? But yes, that should show them that whatever your best hopes were, they're not coming true this season. And the only reasonable thing to do is this, is to start unloading some of those contracts for guys who aren't going to be around in the future and giving opportunities to guys who you think will be. And they've been slowly doing it with more Nolan Jones and Brenton Doyle and things like that throughout the season. But it's time to shift it into overdrive here. And if they move out those players that I mentioned earlier, that will essentially do it, right? If you're moving out Harold Castro, then presumably either Coco Montez is taking over at second base, or maybe you've got Montero in there more, and I don't think they want to move Mac back to second with the way he's been. But there's lots of ways you can do it, right? Tolia can come up, any number of guys you can get in there. So yes, they should do the soft rebuild or whatever you want to call it, and I think that they will. I get why there's been a lot of reticence to believe that the Rockies will make smart baseball moves because they haven't done a lot over the years. But I am of the firm belief that Bill Schmidt has to be given a chance here. And his first year and a half of being the GM of this team was almost entirely about cleaning up the mess that Jeff Bridich left for him. Right? Bill Schmidt didn't poison the relationship with Nolan Arenado, and he didn't decide to pull the trigger on that move. He was stuck in a no-win situation with Trevor Story and John Gray. And to be fair, I think he screwed up the John Gray thing. But beyond that, he's been in a remarkably tough spot, and most of the moves that he's made have just been about trying to keep the team together and undo the bad that was done. I've seen this season with the Moustakas thing is a great example. So if he comes forward and does these other things, I hope he will be given some credit. I know we'll do it here and say, yeah, did he, save a sinking ship with one move? No, I don't think you can do that. But is he making a lot of smart little moves that can help turn this team around for 24 and beyond? Yeah, if he pulls these off. Now, if we're talking a month from now and all the guys I just mentioned are still on the team, I'm going to be very frustrated.
We'll revisit that.
At that point, he gets no credit.
We'll change our answer on that one. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's been an interesting ride, but with you there. I mean, again, kind of happens in every sport, right? The rebuild thing, yeah, of course, nobody likes that word, but you do see teams losing on purpose in every sport because they have no other answer at some point. So unfortunately, it's not the first time that we may have seen a similar situation. We've got one more here for you. Drew, why does it seem that the Rockies are able to develop position players so much more effectively than pitchers at the minor league level?
There are a lot of reasons why this both feels and kind of is true.
Mhm.
The biggest reason why it feels true is because it's harder to pitch at Coors Field than it is to pitch anywhere else. In fact, it's not just that it's harder to pitch at Coors Field than it is to pitch anywhere else, because when they go on the road, they have to make these wild adjustments, and it's harder to pitch there as well. It's harder to be a pitcher with half your games coming at Coors Field than it is anywhere else. It's just a monster of a problem.
Hmm.
And, you know, when you adjust for the ballpark, a lot of the pitchers who you think probably aren't that great are a little better than maybe you think, but the raw numbers aren't there. So you go, these guys aren't that exciting, right? Outside of Cy Young caliber years from Ubaldo Jimenez in 2010 and Kyle Freeland in 2018, you really don't see a Rockies pitcher with an ERA better than 3.30, but 3.30 for a Rockies pitcher is way, way better than it is for anybody else. And that's something that just a lot of, whether it's media or fans or whatever, just hasn't quite caught up to, because there's so much negativity around the team that they have earned.
Mm-hmm.
There's been less of an interest in people diving into the numbers to explain why a lot of the pitching is a lot better than people realize when it comes award voting season. Kyle Freeland finished fourth for that Cy Young award. He belonged in second. Now, DeGrom deserved to win it. He had a ridiculous year. But if you look at doing the opposite of what voters always do for Rockies hitters, which is, well, Coors Field, I'm going to subtract a bunch of points. They don't do the same thing for Rockies pitching. Oh, Coors Field, I'm going to add a bunch of points to their production. That doesn't happen. So it's easier to hit at Coors, obviously, right? So you're going to have that. It has also just been the case that over the years, they've been better at developing position player talent. There are a number of philosophical part of that is no one has the answer yet to how do you pitch at Coors Field. There are people who might believe, well, they've just never simply had a good one. But in 30 years of a franchise's history, you should have a couple of guys who are randomly able to break through and do it. And when you see that the numbers are what they are, there's clearly a unique problem going on here. And nobody has the answer for it yet, including, unfortunately, the Rockies brass, as it were. That said, the most recent time they were good, 17 and 18, was entirely because of their success in well, not entirely. It was primarily and overwhelmingly, in my mind, a result of their success in developing their own starting pitching. Kyle Freeland, Ramon Marquez, John Gray, Antonio Senzatella, Chad Bettis, Jeff Hoffman. Actually, he was bad for the Rockies in his career, but that year he was good. So that I think is still the methodology. For the most part, they have to grow their own. They just have to do a better job of drafting and developing the pitchers. But they've shown they can do it. They've just not shown they can consistently do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, man, I know that Coors Field, it's a problem, but
it's rough.
It's something they got to keep into consideration and figure out. And I know you said that you don't have the answer, and apparently nobody does, but someone has to at some point, right? They got to figure something out.
I'll tell you the thing that's the most frustrating about that whole dynamic to me, Kim, and I put this in an article recently on Mile High Sports, is that it's one of the YouTube videos. So make sure you're all subscribed to the YouTube out there. In the top 6 offensive seasons in Rockies history, and we all know they're better at getting good offense, they've made the playoffs one time, 2007. It's the only one of their top offenses that made the postseason. Sort by their top 7 pitching seasons. 5 of the top 7 pitching seasons did they make the postseason, and in all 7 of them, they had winning records. Wow. So it's harder for them to find good pitching, but when they do, that's what makes them good.
That's the difference. Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. And you've been saying that for a long time. We've talked about that several times. So, all right, Drew, we'll enjoy. Everybody have a fantastic holiday weekend, and we'll see you guys probably in a few weeks here.